There we go.
There we go. Great. Okay, so we'll start here with these folks, and then we'll let people come in as they do. I am Nyla Myers. I am the president of APSE, and I want to thank you all for coming, and for Rachel in particular for presenting this to us. She has done a session about this work at multiple conferences, IRE. She talked about it a little at our own summer conference, and is very interested in sharing her work and these possibilities with other journalists, and I appreciate that as well. I am going to, well, Rachel, why don't you give us a little brief intro of yourself, and then we'll go around the room a little.
Sure. So I've been a sports reporter for mainly newspapers for almost 2 decades now. Done a variety of roles, covered colleges, a lot of Olympics, investigations, and those things often will intersect with each other, actually. Was at USA Today for 10 years, and now I am the Olympics reporter for Sports Business Journal. So don't get to use these ones, these skills as much. So I'm glad to share them all with you. It would be helpful before I jump in to just know like a brief, brief background where you are, sort of your proximity to covering colleges or this, where this data might be helpful. I can kind of keep that in mind as we go. So I don't know where we want to start. Stephen, you're first on my screen next to Nyla, so I'll pick on you first.
All right, yeah. Hi, I'm Steven. I'm a freshman at BU. I'm in the data science major right now, and I'm also thinking about picking up either communications or journalism as a minor. Okay. So that's really the intersection here for me. I'm really interested in sports analytics and like the advanced side of that, especially in like hockey. So yeah, yeah, that's really why I'm here. I'm excited about that.
Okay. Okay, Connor. If you can hear me or unmute.
There you go. Yeah. How are you guys? My name is Connor Core. I'm a junior journalism major, but I'm in a accelerated program. So technically I'm a senior at Quinnipiac University in Hamden, Connecticut. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. Stephen, good luck on Wednesday when BU plays Quinnipiac. Top 10 matchup. So we'll see how that goes. But hopefully Quinnipiac comes out on the win. Anyway, about me. So I'm currently the president of Q30 Television, our student television station on campus. And I was super interested in just the reporting of college athletics at Quinnipiac. We're in a certain unique spot just because it's like a private university, which makes it a little bit harder to get access and answers at not only a college athletics level, but also university level. So I'm really just looking to see best practices about going it from the athletics perspective, obviously, and hopefully to pick up tools of the trade today. So,
well, good news. I too went to a small private school in the Northeast. Gotcha. So I'm familiar with that. And there's, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is about public records, but there is in this a way that you can also get to some private school data as well. All right, Lydia. I'm just going here on my screen. So.
Hi, I'm Lydia. I'm a junior at Boston University studying journalism. I really want to go into sports, and analytics is a huge interest of mine, so that's why I'm here. And I've been doing a lot of research into equality between men's and women's sports, so I'm hoping to look how to mine those data sets. So
okay. Andrew?
Yeah, I'm Andrew Mahoney with the Boston Globe. I'm covering college hockey. And my boss kind of mentioned this webinar, and it looks like something cool to check out. So that's kind of why I'm here.
Very strong Boston contingent here. All right, Sherrod.
Yes, to round out the Boston contingent, Sherrod Blakely, I'm a professor at Boston University, and so happy to see some of my young folks here who I alerted them that this was available, and I'm glad that they took me up on that option and are here. I teach sports reporting, smartphone reporting, and a couple other types of reporting here at BU. But the big thing I wanted to is just have students learn something that they may not be as familiar with, and just add more tools to the toolbox of talents, which is why I'm here. I can't begin to tell you how many times I was referred to the Buckley Amendment when I was asking for information when I covered colleges. So they will. I'm looking forward to them getting an opportunity to hear from you and just kind of get some best practices under their belt today.
Sure. So I'll share my screen. Oh, hey, Eric.
Eric's here. Nice.
We're just going around the room and saying where each of us are. So you get to be the lucky last one here before I jump in the presentation.
All right. I'm in St. Louis.
Okay. Eric and I chatted a bunch about this at the APSE convention, so I got a little bit of that background. So before I start in on this, I will say, and the degree to which this is useful, maybe, definitely will be impacted by many of you being at private institutions. But my gospel, like one of my favorite things is public records, right? Getting ways to access information that you're entitled to. That's obviously harder at a private university because some of these records you're not entitled to, but I would encourage you to develop a public records mindset to where are those touch points where your private institution intersects with a public agency or public entity that you can get access to that, right? Like law enforcement would be a good example, right? Either players getting in trouble or even mundane things, right? Like crowd control for big events, arrest reports. I mean, there's several of these that you can still get information. And then where some of the college specific data is concerned, there are not as good as some of the public records, but there are still ways to sort of get in it. So I'm going to share, let me get here. Let me share my screen and then do a slideshow here. And you guys see that slideshow? Just someone audibly. I can't see you guys anymore.
I can, yes.
Okay.
You can, yes.
Okay. So we're wanting to get beyond the box score, and I know that a couple of you touched on data analytics. What I'm talking about here is maybe not so much you're thinking about, like, calculating a specific stat for a sport. These are more on the business and the structure and the spending and revenue of an athletic department. So some of the places that we can find this data, I'm doing this on behalf of the Knight-Newhouse school, or the Newhouse school. They work with the Knight Commission to collect a bunch of this data from NCAA revenue and expense reports. But there's also, and this will be particularly relevant for the folks at private institutions, the Equity in Athletics Disclosure Act database. This is a law that Congress passed in the 90s that requires every school that gets a certain type of federal funding, but it's basically virtually every school, to report a set of data every year to the Department of Education, and then they publish that online in a way that you can search it. It's not as detailed as, some of the NCAA data, but it can be very helpful at pointing out where there might be problems. NCAA databases, I have some links to those later in this, and then again, public records to request, and this is very different if you're covering private school, but I would say if you're covering any public schools, like trying to get these and have them routinely. I used to cover the University of Florida, and one of the stories I did, I had requested every contract for every coach, right? So anybody who they had on their staff, and they had a particularly successful year, not in the big sports, but in a lot of the other, non-revenue sports where won conference or national titles, several of them. And I was able to pull from those contracts and write a story about, like, all this success is costing the school, $2-something million, or whatever it was in bonuses for that. So I would just encourage you to think of those things. This is not by any means an exhaustive list, but can be helpful in terms of collecting that information and reporting out stories. All right. So the first one on that list, and this is what the Knight-Newhouse database is based on, are these NCAA revenue and expense reports. They submit them every year to the NCAA in January. And for the public schools, you can just ask them. Many of them are, because of this project, kind of routinely in the habit of giving them out. This one I just pulled here is a page from Penn State. Penn State I think isn't even required by law to release theirs, but they publish it on their website. So these have about 40 categories of 20-ish each of revenues and expenses where they're spending it. There we go. So what this database is, this is a project that started at USA Today, where I used to work. I did not have a hand in starting it, but Jody Upton and one of my old colleagues, Steve Berkowitz, started pulling these into a database. And then when she went to Syracuse, they continued the effort with the support of the Knight Commission. And it pulls from public Division I schools with these reports, and it pulls 2005 to 2022, all this data from those NCAA reports in a way that you can sort of crunch the numbers quickly. You can track the money, where it comes from, where it's going. You can select by revenue and expense category. It's very customizable. You can look at a specific school, a specific conference, a specific division. If you just wanted to do Power 5, and pretty easily export, assuming you don't have too many variables, export data and graphics that you can use in your reporting. So I'm just going to show you here, and I'm going to navigate away to show you the actual. So this is what it looks like, the Knight-Newhouse College Athletics database. And there's ways you can just kind of, look at different divisions and browse it. I typically go to this custom reporting, okay? And so you can see if I click on this, it gives me several different revenue categories. Each of these little eyes helps explain what those are. Same thing here with expense categories. And then these are where you really customize the data and what you want to be looking at. So you can select whichever category you want up here at the top. Select which schools. You can see here, you can filter. You could say, let's where are you?
Rachel, I don't want to cut you off, but
Yep.
you're not showing the screen that you're on right now. It's still
Okay.
showing the PowerPoint.
All right, let me, how about now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, there we go.
Sorry, Google Meet little idiosyncrasy. Okay, so back to what I was saying. This is the custom data reporting, and you can select revenue categories, expense categories, some combination of them, right? And then down here you can select for which institutions, right? I've just picked Massachusetts because many of you are in Massachusetts, and these are the public Division I schools there. You certainly don't have to do it by state. You could do it by, there you go. We could pick every SEC school if we wanted to. And then you can, or you could do them collectively, right? Let's say you wanted to just compare the Big Ten to the SEC, or, the ACC to the Pac-12, whatever you wanted to do, or any of these other conferences. And then you can select for year. And I'm going to walk through a few examples of these. So I'm just trying to show you where everything is. As a general rule, adjust for cross inflation. And then assuming you don't have too many variables, you can select include a graph. So let me see. So I go back to my presentation here, and I'll just walk through, well, maybe I can do it quickly. I'll walk through them unless anybody wants to be brave and try to tackle doing this themselves. So median football salaries for what did I have? Power 5 public schools. Let me see. So this is the graph of that, tracking this. This is roughly around the time of the Bannon decision, right? So big changes in college athletics, and we're seeing football salaries just increase here. Whenever you run one of these reports, it will generate a unique report. So this is where I pulled the table from. You can export the chart. It has a unique ID up here, so you can just bookmark it and go back to it. And then each one in the data has, a little bit of explainer. Like you can see the specific numbers that go to it. So for Power 5, which the database calls them Autonomy 5, in 2015, the median football coaching salaries were 8 million. You see when we go over here to 2022, that goes up to 11 million. So certainly a trend that you can look at and watch. You could do that by conference, do that by school, do that however you want to slice and dice it. Let me see here. What did I have? Okay, so this question that I put on here, as some of you may be aware, there's quite a bit of reporting about looking at the extent to which the student body subsidizes the athletic departments, right? And we can see in this graph what it's loosely showing us is that actually at the group of 5 schools, that institutional and government support is pretty high, as well as the student fees, right? So there's, as all students know, when you pay your tuition, there's like some amount of fee that's like athletic fees, whether you ever go to a game or not. And this varies by school, but you can sort of see the trends here. Let me switch to, that's my coaching salaries one. All right, so this is when I generate the report. Like I said, you can share here, and it gives you more of the concrete numbers here, right? So you can see the percent change over a period of time. Certainly when we look at this in terms of institutional governance support, this is going to be a COVID thing. So this is this $1.2 million is a median, is something that you would look maybe a little bit more to. The things that came out of the pandemic. So anybody stop me? Since I can't see you, I don't know if you have a hand raised or have any questions. But stop me if you do. Let me go back here. All right, so the last one for the database, and this is a particularly relevant one, to ask how much Texas A&M spent on, basically spent directly on students. So the categories that cover that, those expenses in the database would be obviously athletic student aid, right? Scholarships that they're giving to their athletes, and then medical. Those are the most direct ones. You could maybe make the case, like recruiting or travel, but I think that's a little bit obtuse. I picked this time period because a coach named Jimbo Fisher was hired during this time period. And so we can see sort of year by year here, what those look like. If I go to the next screen, sorry, jumping ahead here, that we can see, the total dollar amounts for those each year. I won't bore you with pulling up the spreadsheet, but I did the math, right? Like just what is the total spend on these 2 categories directly to athletes? And it was 65.5 million. And for anybody keeping track at home, the buyout for Jimbo Fisher is at least $76 million. I think a lot of how I think about reporting on this type of data is informed by the discussion around college athletics right now. We've seen through court cases, NIL legislation, governance changes, congressional, I'll say interest because the action is not there. A greater focus and discussion on who's getting the money, where the money's going, and who's helping generate the money, and how much part of that players are entitled to. So I think you could do a story that shows, during Jimbo Fisher's 5 seasons at Texas A&M, the school spent less on its student athletes directly than it will pay for him to go away. It's pretty telling, detail that you could include in a story. All right, quick pause. Any questions before I move on to EADA, which is where a lot of the private school info will come from? Okay, we'll just keep trucking along here. Can you guys still see the presentation? I can't tell the way it's showing it now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so for the private schools, this is the EADA data that I was talking about. And you can find the web address is actually kind of silly, but if you just Google EADA data, this page will come up. And I would say one of the limitations of just searching in here, if you do this like compare data for multiple schools, I think it only lets you do 4. So let's say you were trying to do a conference, that's going to be more than 4. So this download custom data tends to be the most helpful. Back here. So this is the website. Again, you can just Google it, and I'll walk you through a couple examples that you can pull from here. The first one, Western Kentucky, you can get the NCAA reports for this. So I'm using this because from our reporting on Title IX, when I was at USA Today, like I know there is a problem here. And for a lot of schools, especially when you're talking about BU and private schools, EADA data is going to be the best and only publicly available information that you have on this. And I can talk about the limitations, but I'll show you why I'm using Western Kentucky as an example here. So in our reporting on Title IX, one of the key areas of Title IX compliance is participation opportunities. Basically, our school is giving enough chances to compete to female athletes. It says underrepresented sex, but that's almost always female athletes. And you can go and count whether they are or not, and by how much they would need to change. So one of the key ways that a school can show compliance with Title IX is athletic participation proportional to the student body. So if you're a school like Western Kentucky, where 60% of your undergraduate students are women, then roughly 60% of your participation opportunities should be going to women. What we're seeing here is that based on the data going back 20 years, they have always needed to add more than 100, sometimes more than 200, sometimes up to 300 to have that sort of proportionality. A lot of schools, we did reporting on this at USA Today, a lot of schools fall into this problem because athletic departments historically were male, and then teams were added for women, but football is just a numbers sport that there's not an equivalent or a good equivalent on the women's side, and schools traditionally don't add enough teams that they can and should. I can switch here to where am I? I'm going to show you this spreadsheet. Don't be intimidated by it. This is when you go to EADA and you say get custom data, this is what it will export for you, right? And it's got multiple tables, and it's telling you year by year, right? This is how many football participants. This is how many men's golf, right? So anytime you're working with data, leave your master spreadsheet alone, right? Just copy paste this somewhere else, because then if you delete a column or something like that, if anybody is interested in this, is like 201 or 301 analysis, but can be done on pretty much any school. This is the comparison, right? So we can see here what the percentages are of male to female enrollment. Western Kentucky's been more than 50% female enrollment for 20 plus years, right? But we see the opposite when we look over here in terms of the athletic opportunities for women. So we see a fairly large gap. This is where the analysis is. So you can tell, and again, I'm happy to help walk you through this formula for anybody who wants to do it, how many they need to add to be proportional. So I cannot say Western Kentucky is for sure out of compliance, because there are other ways they could show compliance. Those other ways are hard, and they're pretty out of whack on this one. So there's indications of a significant problem here. Okay, we'll go back to our presentation. So also in EADA, I just pulled up, what are private FBS schools? There are only 18 of them. What are they spending on recruiting for men versus women? And how does that compare? When you pull up, sorry. When you pull up a school, this like thing on the bottom is a representative example. So this one is this USC where there's a $2.9 million gap where you can see on recruiting expenses, excuse me. And so this is one where I'm gonna switch over to the spreadsheet, where this is how it exported. And so this is the master spreadsheet, and I just added a column, do the math. Tell me what the difference is between these two. So you can see that. I would say, this certainly suggests issues in commitment to program, resources, all those sorts of things. In terms of Title IX compliance, there are three main buckets. Participation opportunities, and there's a few different ways schools can show compliance. Athletic student aid, scholarships, and there's like a pretty clear test for that. And then the third one is something called the laundry list, but it's 11 categories that are treatment, right? So it can be like equipment, access to coaching, tutoring, recruiting, all these sorts of things. And Title IX does not say that these things need to be dollar for dollar equal, but just that they need to be equitable. And when they're not equitable, that there's some sort of non-discriminatory reason why. I think this would be a pretty difficult one for USC to explain. My guess is it's, largely related to football. But that would be something worth exploring. And falling short in any of those categories could lead to a finding of non-compliance where that's concerned for a school. And then this is just, let's pick on a private school. I picked on Notre Dame. It can give you a sense of, total expenses, total revenue, things like that in the EADA data. So
Rich, I just had a quick question for you.
Yeah.
Sorry. So for the participation, student aid, and laundry list things that you were talking about, what umbrella did you said that fell under?
What do you mean?
So you said, sorry, that like
That's
there's
okay.
three things that the like private universities have to have. Is that like all for Title IX, like the participation, the student aid, and the
Yes.
laundry list? That's all
So-
for private, Title IX privates. Okay.
No, so Title IX applies to any school that it gets a specific kind of, I don't know how to stop. Let me just stop sharing for a minute so you can see me. Title IX applies to any school that gets a specific kind of federal funding, which for all intents and purposes is almost all schools, right? Like, because you have students on your campus who are getting like Pell Grants and, like federal funding in any way. Not in any way, it's a specific way, but there's very few schools for which Title IX does not apply to them. And like some of them have to get a specific exemption, and they tend to be like religious schools. And I'm happy to send you more resources on this, because this was like my life for a year and a half around the 50th anniversary. When the Department of Education is determining whether someone has complied with Title IX, which is like a whole separate category of whether they would be investigated for it, there's three main ways. Participation, right? Like, show us that you are giving women enough opportunities. There's something called the three-prong test. I won't get into it, but I am happy to explain further. So that's one category. Second one is athletic student aid, or the Department of Education calls it athletic financial assistance. That has a fairly straightforward mathematical test on that one. And then the third one is what I call like the treatment categories, but it is the laundry list of, I think right now there are 11 on there. And a school could be investigated for any or all of those, right? They could, the Department of Education could get a specific complaint of our field is garbage and the other team's field is, the Taj Mahal or something, and could go and just investigate that one issue and say, yes or no, give us this information on this question. They could do something that's called a compliance review, which is where they go and they do like a whole Title IX analysis for a program. I would encourage you, and I can put a link in the chat, because we did a ton of reporting on this in 2022. And what I would say, compliance reviews are rare. And as we wrote in the story, we wrote a whole investigative series. the consequences for this are basically toothless from the federal government, but what the schools really fear is being sued. And as you can see in our reporting, if you look at these schools, and especially schools that have football, it's not hard to find these kinds of issues. It may vary from school to school. I had a different student who I met at APSC. They wanted to report on it, and I said, actually, by the math, like, it looks like they're okay on athletic financial assistance, but in these categories, this is where you should focus your reporting and ask more questions. So I can drop that in the chat. So yes, those 3 categories all apply. So at Quinnipiac, this may be a question, and there's actually very famous Title IX court case involving your school.
There is,
and
yeah.
about whether you can count cheerleaders and all that kind of stuff. So yes, so it does apply. All right, let me go back to
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back to that because I had just looking for clarification. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I'm almost through the presentation, and then we can jump into any other questions, or if you have specific examples, I'm happy to walk you through either database. So with all this data, whether it's the Knight-Newhouse school, which sounds like most of you, for the being at private institutions, might not use, but I would say is good to have, because your schools are competing against peer institutions who are public, so it could give you some valuable insight. Helps us see where they're drawing their revenue, what their expenses are, how those are changing over time, as we've spent a lot of time talking about gender gaps. Any other red flags that come up regarding Title IX compliance, the question we talked about earlier, how much students are subsidizing the athletic department. There's a separate severance category, so I'm sure some people did, or I know some people did, because I saw it and we tweeted it. When Jimbo Fisher is getting $76 million, ESPN used this database and reported that that's more than half of like the $140 something million in severance payments that these schools are paying to coaches literally since last year. So you can ask it all sorts of questions. It's certainly not an exhaustive list. I would say there are also other, maybe not always as robust, but other sources of data. And I'll, after this presentation is done, I'll share this so it has the specific links in it. The NCAA has its own research department, which has several different data sets on how many schools have a specific sport, transfers, graduations rates, things like that. Its infractions database, I would say coverage of NCAA infractions is certainly not what it used to be. Michigan sign stealing notwithstanding this week. Sort of generally the type of violations that may have been stuff that were covered extensively a decade ago are not necessarily the same. The other thing I would say, Title IX applies in the athletic context. It also is applicable, as many of you I'm sure are aware, to schools in regarding sexual misconduct and the handling of it. The Department of Education publishes on its website a list that is basically just a list of where they have investigations open, and it will tell you, what's the nature, whether it's Title IX athletics, Title IX sexual misconduct. And then it also publishes recent resolutions. So after it goes in and it does an investigation, it issues a letter. The school typically agrees to make some sort of changes, and then that's all publicly available and a really great resource. These apply more to public schools, these last ones. There's been some really good reporting done on by getting exit interviews. They will not include the, I personally identifying name, although some of the reporting on this has been done on basketball teams. So those are sometimes pretty small, and you can tell where these issues are raised of coach abuse. In terms of recruiting, this is something that came up in our Title IX reporting where, we saw big gaps in the numbers, what they were spending. And I'll pick on Indiana as an example. We could see that the basketball team was chartering flights and had a car service for men's team recruits, but not doing the same thing for the women's basketball team. So, this data can help tell the story. It can also be the start of your reporting to go find other information that would help further flesh it out or explain those differences. That's it. This is my contact info. I'm happy to walk through any questions right now, or go through any examples if there's something you you want to see more how the databases are used, I'm happy to try to help guide you through that. So just let me know.
So in the beginning of the presentation, Rachel, you talked about like finding the crossroads between private universities and public entities. Like just off the top of your head, obviously, you know, you have the 990s that like nonprofits have to submit.
Yep.
Like what other federal like things do private universities have to submit to the federal government that, you know, reporters could get their hands on by like publicly accessing them?
So I wouldn't say it necessarily has to be all federal government, right? So 990s are a great example. I'm very excited that you know about 990s. Which a quick and easy way to get them, let's say Quinnipiac's giving you the runaround. ProPublica, and there's a website called GuideStar. Like basically hoover them up every year for anything, right? Like I cover the Olympics. All the governing bodies for the Olympics are 501c3s, so like all their 990s are there. You know, there's, let's say, you know, this is not a good example. Let's say Joe Biden came to speak at a, you know, on campus and like went to a basketball game, right? You could get, well, some of the federal government stuff there's, it's not like a universal, there are exceptions to FOIA. You know, like security detail, you know, local law enforcement, things like that. I would also look at like reporting requirements in the state. You know, there's probably state, you know, level laws that they have to comply with that they would be sending things to. You know, sometimes accrediting bodies, or they're not public entities, but they will have information that can be useful. I don't have an exhaustive list of like, here's all the places. I would just be looking at like where are you know, where are the touch points, where does this intersect, and that there's, you know, something to get. Law enforcement is a fairly obvious one, and those are generally fairly open records, but there are certainly others as well.
Gotcha, thank you. And then the one you said, 2 websites, ProPublica, and what was the second one?
It's called GuideStar. GuideStar. Although that one is kind of like ProPublica is like totally free. GuideStar at some point you will hit a subscription paywall.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
Anybody else?
One question that I had on the EADA website. I was looking at BU, and under like the revenues by team, I can't find. It just says basketball, and I assume for other schools that have varsity football programs, it would have football, and then it has total revenues for all sports other than football and basketball. So I'm wondering if there's, I mean, especially for a school like BU where hockey is where so much of the revenue I assume comes from, if there's a way to find that.
There's not, and this is one of the problems with the EADA data is it doesn't break down by in a NCAA. So BU submits an NCAA revenue and expense report. They're not exempt from this requirement. They're just exempt from having to share it with you. So I would say, like, to the extent you have sources in the athletic department or develop sources who might be willing to give it to you, like that would have that information. That is not required in the EADA data. So that's like, that's just a limitation. I'm trying to think of where else you could find it. I mean, the other thing you can do, and this is not a substitute, right? But, well, actually, most of the schools with hockey are private. I'm trying to think, like, if they have public school peers who you could go to, like, get a sense of, like, okay, what's the ballpark of this, and then at least use that as a jumping off point to start asking questions. And trust me, I went to a private school when there was like an NCAA scandal while I was there, so like getting anybody to answer anything was almost impossible. So I truly feel for you, but that's maybe a creative way where you can say, like, you know, I know, you know, they played these public schools, I can go get those reports and see that, you know, on average the median is X whatever amount of revenue, and then use that to start asking questions of the athletic department, and go from there. But that's not going to be contained in the EADA. unfortunately. The EADA also, this was on the presentation, again, I'll share it. It doesn't show things like capital projects, for instance, right? So if your school is building a new football stadium, softball stadium, whatever, that's not going to show up on there. It also doesn't show like negative revenue, so like programs definitely lose money. But that's not a reporting function that just works in EADA. So again, it's the best insight you're going to get at a private institution, but it's not the best data, if that makes sense. Anybody else?
I just had one other question. So
Mhm.
just to make sure, the things that are submitted in January through the EADA, that's the NCAA revenue and expense reports throughout the entire university, correct?
So these are separate things. Every school in January submits their NCAA revenue and expense reports. But
Okay.
at private schools, you don't have access to them, right? The Knight-Newhouse database is based on those reports for Division I public schools. It's like 230-ish schools. And so they have those because, Syracuse and USA Today go to those schools and say, I would like, give me your 2022 report, please, right? And then that gets scraped and compiled into that database. EADA, I don't remember when the actual reporting deadline is. That's a separate thing that every school files with the government, and then the government puts online. And there are some sort of similarities in the data, but it's not perfect. One of the things I forgot to note in the presentation, EADA is an example, will allow a school to count male participants as male practice players as female participants, if that makes sense. So a lot of women's basketball teams have like a practice squad of men on campus who they will play against, just for a variety of reasons. Schools can count that and say, oh, well, we're giving 23 basketball opportunities for women, even though the number of women is less. And most schools will note that, but only in the current year. So like, again, it's kind of like the best you can do when you're looking at a private school, outside of like trying to get these other things from sources, or lawsuits are a really good way these come out too. They come out as part of lawsuits. So it's the best indicator that you can find where there's potentially a problem, but you also can't use it to say like, oh, well, they're out of compliance with Title IX, or they're in violation of Title IX, because the numbers that the school would give to the department were they under investigation are probably different than what they give on EADA as well. Anybody else?
I just want to say this has been great information. Thanks for sharing this, Rachel.
Yeah. Happy to. And I'm happy. I know I'm like throwing a lot at you guys, and you're probably like, what is she talking about on some of this stuff? I'm happy to. I'll put the PDF I'll give that to Nyla to share. If you have like follow-up questions, or you start reporting and you're like, what is this? I don't understand. Please, email me. I'm happy to try to, walk you through it, or give you suggestions.
Actually, Rachel, this is Sherrod Blake. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. I actually had a question for students who are looking to utilize some of these tools in their reporting. Mm-hmm. What would you suggest would be the best path for them to potentially get their work published?
It's a good question. I would not assume that student media is a viable option where you are, and I would not sell short the potential there. So I, until very recently, lived in Florida, where two different student journalists broke stories in student media that became national stories and led to the firings of coaches around specifically, like verbal, mental, emotional abuse of players. I would say same thing at Stanford. Theo Baker won several awards for not a sports story, but issues with the, like, literally led to the president resigning at that university. So I would say that. I would say, to the extent that they want to go outside of this, and I worked for both. I worked for student media, and I went to work for like a local newspaper when I was still a student. When you are going to those places, you know, outside of that, you know, let's say you want to go to a local website, paper, news, TV station, or whatever. Not necessarily that you have to have a story done, but it can't be like, oh, I'm curious about, right? Being far enough in the reporting to know that there's probably a there, and being able to clearly articulate that. You know, I would think about it in the context of freelance pitching, where, you know, maybe you make like a story memo, like what's the key question that we're trying to answer, or issue we're trying to cover here. What do we already know? How can we, you know, where is the reporting coming from to know more? And then, you know, that may be enough to get, you know, an editor, whomever interested. I think that's going to vary by place too. Like, some places I'm sure would probably want to see something closer to a actual story. Just kind of hard to do, you know, like do all that reporting. And, you know, unless maybe they're like doing it for your class and then trying to get it published. So I think it just depends, but I think student media can be, you know, it's probably not, I don't know, some pay, some do not. But it can also be impactful. I've seen student journalists scoop pros before on big stories.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cause I just think about the kids at Northwestern, and and just the stuff that they were able to do and just be very impactful. And you're right. There are a multitude of ways to just really get your content out there, your reporting out there for others to see. So yeah, I just was just curious of your thoughts on that. Okay. Thank you.
And I have perhaps a unique perspective on this too. I mentioned, you know, when I was a student, I went to St. Bonaventure, and we had an NCAA recruiting scandal. You know, this was like 20 years ago. And at the time it was a big deal. They had admitted a player who didn't have the proper credentials, like a JUCO player. And like everyone on up to the president got fired. Like, it was a huge deal. Students are in such a position of having unique access that we as professionals do not have, right? So when that story happened, right, like, we're going nuts. We're a weekly newspaper. It's on ESPN because the players like boycotted the last 2 games of the season. And we're like, this is before we were like publishing on a website. So it's like, what are we going to put in the weekly paper that we have that's new? And so after sleeping at the paper, like, hadn't been back to my dorm, like, forget about class all that week. We had heard that one of the big freshman recruits they had was going to transfer. And I was like, oh crap, he's in my Franciscan studies class. And I'm like quickly brushing my teeth at the student newspaper, like, yes, I'm going, like, you know, sending the whole class, like, okay, I've got to corner this 6'8" dude, like, off to the side, because there's also someone else from student media in my class, so they don't see and figure out what's going on. And sure enough, I did it. And we beat, you know, ESPN and the Buffalo News and like all these other media who were covering this story at the time. So never sell short the edge you have on the type of access and approachability, right? Like, probably another student athlete's not going to look askance at you guys coming up to them the way they would, you know, me, like a middle-aged person. And so when that works to your advantage, use that to your advantage.
I want to add
I guess
to
it's
that.
kind of
Oh, can I just pop in real quick? I want to add to that, to what Sherrod said and what Rachel's saying, is that University of Maryland students won the APSC contest, not the student contest, the regular contest, with a student project on Title IX disparities that they were working on essentially as a project for class. So there is, and that was published kind of on the, I guess they have a news service at Maryland, and that's how it was published. And it was a class project essentially. They worked on it for quite a long time, and got quite a lot of recognition for it. So even if it's, I don't want to say just something for class, that's not how I mean it, but you know, working hard on a project like this for class and getting it published is a is also a very valid way to get your work out there.
And to just piggyback on that real quick, sorry, Connor, that was also a Title IX project. And I say this not because it's like impactful in my life and I care about it as an issue to cover. You cannot throw a rock and not find Title IX issues at most places. And there's a whole host of reasons why, and we could have a whole separate, like, 3-hour discussion where I got into all the caveats of this. But this is like a super ripe area of reporting because it's long been a problem for many schools. I'm not saying all schools are not complying or anything, so don't take it that way, but there are common tripwires where this is concerned that schools, because of the way they're set up, frequently run into. So we found them all over the place. The Maryland students found them. I suspect if you guys looked around, you may find some as well. Okay, sorry, Connor.
You're right. I just had a question for you about when you were at St. Bonaventure and you had to like corner the 6'8" freshman who was transferring and stuff like that. So a lot of times in our athletic communications department, sorry, I can't find my words. They've like come to us and have been like, listen, you guys can't talk to the students about athletic purposes when we're not there. I don't know if it was the same way when you were a student, but how do you kind of get around that now where if you hear a story about this and you have to ask the questions, but like how do you get around asking those difficult questions without an SID stepping in and being like, you can't talk about that?
So I will say a couple things. This was literally 20 years ago, so things are different now, and I would say college programs generally try to exert much more control, right? Like we even saw, I'm not sure if you saw, the USC suspended the access for the Orange County Register beat reporter over something fairly trivial, right? Like they very much, I used to cover the University of Florida, and people would call their sports communications department the firm because, it was not there to help you. I would say, how I thought about, I guess I didn't think about this as much as when I was a student, because it was just kind of like a chaotic news story, and what we were doing was so down the list of their problems. But especially as a professional, you do not have to follow those rules. Now, your access may get impacted by your choice not to. So I would say for the most part, if you're just trying to do a story about some, hockey forward who's having a great season or whatever, work through them. Hey, we'd like to speak to so-and-so or whatever. There are times like where you need to make an assessment. I'm going to completely ignore this. I'm going to blow this up, and I will deal with this discussion later when they're upset with me or, say I can't have a credential or whatever. I'm trying to think of examples. If a player was like if you had a player like charged with murder, like, I'm sorry, I know where his dorm is. Like, we're going to go try to talk to, that's an extreme example. I hope that doesn't actually happen. But I would say, like, take your spots on the routine season coverage, games, features, all that kind of stuff. Try to play by their rules. You also don't have to, and there are times to completely ignore them. And you just make that assessment and be willing to have that conversation with whoever is going to give you a hard time about it on the back end, right? Like the SID is going to call you or something like that. You also have a powerful tool, assuming you're working in student media, where it's like, oh, we tried to talk to so-and-so about this very serious thing, and then, the athletic department revoked our credential, or, you have the ability to call them out publicly for it. So my general advice would be pick your spots. I wouldn't do it on every story. On a big story, I would.
I would also add that as you're developing sources on the beats that you're covering, just in basic source development, and as you are interviewing players for that feature about their great season, or just after a game, as you're working on getting to know these athletes and these coaches on your beats, just maintain the relationships, and maybe that will be a huge benefit down the line when it becomes difficult, right? It could be the SID saying no, but if you feel your relationship is strong enough with the player, their coaches, their parents, like parents are a big one covering college sports. You know, you might be able to go around the SID just because you've built a relationship.
Yep.
So, you know, always keep that in mind as you're developing sources and when you're on beats and just when you are reporting the quote normal stories about how that relationship can benefit you later when things might be a little more difficult.
And the thing I would add on that is have a broad net of who you're trying to build those source relationships, right? Like the student manager may be more valuable to you than the assistant coach, or trying to develop one, you know, like getting close to like a head coach, right? Like you could probably get the student manager's like cell phone number, you know. And then part of that source building is like having those conversations where they're off the record, or you're just chatting. Oh, hey, you know, how's it going? What are your holiday plans? Being like a normal human being. If the only time you're calling them is when things are hitting the fan, then that's not gonna help you. But especially when you have access issues or sports information trying to control things, what Nyla said about parents, right? That was like how I broke some stories when I was a Gator beat writer, because like they wouldn't tell me if the quarterback was injured and going to play, but like his mom would, because I'd talked to his mom about something else before, you know. So I would say cast a wide net, you know, and develop the, you know, where you can develop those as much as possible. Anybody else?
I just had a question. Like, I know we're focused on quantifiable data sets here, but since you've done so much reporting on Title IX, like, do you have any advice when you're hunting down things that like can't be quantified but might be violations? So, for instance, like BU's hockey teams play in 2 different facilities, and one is much newer and much more updated than the other. But like RSID is another one who does not like to talk and likes to restrict access. And he also, like, the athletes also won't talk because they're afraid of getting in trouble. So, like, do you just have any advice on how you can maybe get that story even when you've got some really uncooperative sources?
So I would say a couple things. I love buildings. So my first job out of high school was covering like a area high schools, actually down here in North Carolina where I live again now. And I prompted a Title IX investigation because we did this big, you know, story around the 35th anniversary. And as an example, one of the high schools for the boys team, the boys basketball team had a locker room, and there was a visiting locker room. So whenever they're playing home games, each one could have their own locker room. For the girls team, there was one locker room. And when they played a home game, the visiting team got it and they went and changed in the weight room. You know, like that's you know, I can't tell you that all the rooms are the same age, they're in the same gym, but like that's a very clear violation. So I would say things like that where there's difference. It sounds like they're using different facilities. So you could look at you want to talk about access points, the extent to which there's been like building code inspections, violations, things like that, that could give you an indication of the quality of the women's facility relative to the men's. I would also say start with the formers, right? The players who are currently on the team, of course, they don't want to tell you like, oh, this place is a dump and we hate it and it's not fair that the men's team has something way better. But the alumni from 3 years ago, I might let it rip. You know, like I would always start there, and then you may reach a critical point where you can go to like a current player and say, look, I've talked to a dozen recent alumni, right? And they're telling me of some of these issues. I just want to see to the extent that's still like an ongoing thing you guys are struggling with. I would also say, and this is part of reporting, it's a numbers and it's an attribution negotiation sometime on things like this. I would talk to people for a story, and not everyone would feel comfortable with me using their name, but they would be comfortable with me being counted where I could say 6 people close to the program said why. You know what I mean? Said this person did this thing, or said that this thing happened, or that this person told them this thing about like an assault or something like that. So I would say there may be people who aren't willing to say, hi, I, Rachel Axon, say that this building is a flaming piece of garbage and should be burnt to the ground. but would say, routinely leaks. The pipes back up into the locker room and it smells like, feces or something like that. The other thing I would say, and this is, if you're a college student, this is hard. I think sometimes for professional journalists, having those upfront discussions with sources about like what they're comfortable with. And some people are going to be comfortable going on the record with their name. Some people may only want to talk to you on background. Some people may only want to talk to you off the record, and that still can be valuable because it gives you a sense of, okay, where can I go and look, right? I'm not going to tell them that this person X told me this, but I can, they told me this, like, oh, I can go and see like, this like, I don't know, soft spot in the corner of the ice because there's some problem with the building or something like that. So I would say, I think as a student journalist, and I'll just speak for myself, sometimes it feels like it's like, okay, go direct, right? I have a question about this, so I'm going to go direct to the SID or direct to the coach or direct to the player. And so much of like, especially this investigative reporting, right? It's like working from the outside in, right? Like who knows but has the least to lose here, right? And what can I learn from what they tell me? And they may tell you things that you weren't on your radar, you didn't think of, and it leads you to a different direction, right? Like you have to follow the reporting. And then you move like a step closer, right? So you start with those former players who are, where was it? Harvard, right? This happened with the coach. And it's a lot of former players, women's hockey, former players saying, they're a step removed from it. Their playing time is not on the line here, and they can say like, no, this is what it was really like. It was bad. And that having that information gives you credibility to go to the people who are invested. And then maybe that's where you have those conversations about what do you feel comfortable with. I'm thinking of an example. I did a story a series of stories at USA Today with another reporter, Kenny Jacoby, about the athletic trainer at San Jose State University. And we got all this documentation that said like he was inappropriately touching female students in the course of treating them for injuries or whatever. And some of those students, and a lot of them were former students who are, like a decade removed from their careers, we're like, print my name, I don't care, like this is wrong, right? And other ones we had to have more nuanced discussions to say, what are you comfortable with? And that got us to like a critical mass where we could say, we talked to X number of people who all said the same sort of behavior, and then we took that information that had been somewhat old and refreshed it, and then found more people who the school hadn't known about. So yeah, I would say numbers, having those conversations with sources, what you feel comfortable with, and trying to go around it from the outside, outside in, for whatever different touch point you can.
And also think about the overlapping communities that are involved. So if you're talking about a trainer at a university, well, that person is also involved in the medical community.
Yep.
Now, the medical community has a lot of their own rules about what they can say or not. But if you want to know what the medical community thinks of something, or like what might be going on, like think about finding the other community that this involves, like that parallel or overlapping group of people, whether it's buildings or city management and athletics, or the medical community and athletics, and you can come at it from that other side too, because it kind of opens your eyes to who potential sources. I mean, again, that might not be on the record, it might just all be background, but like finding the other communities where this thing is involved and going that way is also a way to get information.
That's such a good point. When we were doing that San Jose State story as an example, we had talked to a lot of athletes. This trainer was not allegedly engaging in the same conduct as like a Larry Nassar, right? It was not so blatant where it was like, okay, that there's no medical, some of the best sources were other athletic trainers, right? What you're looking at in these stories is what is the should do, right? What is whether it's like, here's what you should do to comply with Title IX, here's what you should do to comply with building inspection codes. And that story, these other athletic trainers gave us, like, of course you always wear gloves when you're touching someone's body. Of course when it's in a sensitive or potentially private area, you have a chaperone or someone else in the room. Of course, you explain what you're going to do and get informed consent from the patient, right? There's all sorts of standards in the medical community where we could say, here's what it should have looked like. And here was the experience of these women. So it wasn't just like, oh, they felt like he was creepy and it was weird. It was what happened, what they're saying happened, did not comply with the best practices. And ultimately what happened with that story, he was charged federally. He eventually pled to it after mistrial, but they had their own medical expert, the school, in the court case ultimately that was like, oh yeah, this was totally out of boundaries of what should have happened. One of my best investigations was a football building that was in danger of falling on kids' heads, right? And so building codes, inspections, it being condemned, what should they have done was the bar for me to show what hadn't happened.
Thank
Okay,
you.
anybody
I really
else?
appreciate that.
We're past an hour, so these are all great questions. And as you know, this is being recorded, so you can revisit it. So Rachel has also given her contact information. We'll share the slideshow as well with you guys and anyone else who signed up. But if there's nothing else, we can wrap this up. Thank you guys for coming and for your great questions.
Yeah.
And Rachel, and thank you, Rachel, again for sharing your experience.
Yeah, happy to help. Reach out if there's anything else I can help with.
All right. Well, thank you all. And I hope you all have a great weekend and a good Thanksgiving. And we'll keep you posted if we have any other programming and events like this at APSC. And thanks, Sherrod, for being here and for getting your students here. That was nice. It is sort of odd we did end up with a lot of Northeast here. I said in the chat, I'm a little worried about the hockey programs now in the Northeast with all of these keen-eyed journalists looking at them. We know a little something about hockey here in Minnesota. So although we have a public schools doing it, so we don't have as many of these problems. But okay, well, thank you.
Don't be so sure. You might.
No, I'm saying we don't have that. We have the problems. We don't have the access to that.
Transparency issues.
Transparency issues because we are they're mostly public schools. There's problems. Don't get me wrong. There's problems. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great break.
Thank you.
Thank you.